One of the last steps, whether you're buying or selling a home, is reviewing a settlement statement. You can think of it as a giant receipt, or if you remember the old days, like the ledger in your checkbook that you try to balance occasionally. If you're not familiar with them, they can be intimidating. But let's take a look and break it down. There are 4 columns, 2 for the buyer and 2 for the seller. You will only ever see the ones that apply to you, but your lender, escrow, and your broker will review all 4 columns. The buyer and seller each have a debit and credit column. Debits are paid out to that person and credits are received by that person. Some entries will be accounted for by both the buyer and the seller. The purchase price is a debit to the buyer and a credit to the seller. A tax that is yet to be collected will be a debit on the seller side, so they can pay their portion prorated for the time they lived there, and a credit on the buyer side, so they're not paying the tax for the period before they purchased the home. Some entries will only be accounted for on one side. A loan payoff will be a debit on the seller side only. The loan to buy the house will be a credit to the buyer only. The earnest money will be listed as a credit on the buyer side. That might seem wrong. After all, earnest money is something the buyer paid when their offer was accepted, and we think of credits as something that you receive. However, this is correct because the earnest money is deposited by the buyer to show their offer is serious, and it's not paid to the seller. Rather, it's held by escrow. When it's time for the deal to close, escrow effectively pays that back to the buyer, who then uses that money along with their loan to buy the house. At the bottom of the statement, we have the subtotals and the totals. For the buyer, the difference between the debits and credits in the subtotal will be the amount they need to bring to closing. For the seller, the difference between the debits and credits in the subtotal will be the amount of cash they get out of the deal. For each person, the final total of debits and credits, including cash to close and payouts, should be equal. However, the totals of the buyer compared to the seller will not necessarily be equal, since not all costs involved are split evenly. For instance, the fees associated with the loan to buy the house will be listed out and counted as debits on the buyer side only, and they are additional to the purchase price of the home, so the total for the buyer will be greater than the purchase price. Your loan officer should be able to give you an estimate of the fees involved so you know what to expect. And speaking of estimates, it's important to know that the settlement statement you receive before closing is an estimate. Things like utility payoff may not be precise and could change at closing. If you've paid too much, you'll get the overpayment back as a refund shortly after closing. Settlement statements shed a little light on just how complicated real estate purchases are. If you have any questions about the specifics, I'd love to help. Send me an email. If you know anybody getting ready to buy or sell a house, feel free to share a link to this video so they can learn what to expect as well. Stay safe and thanks for watching.